You're listening to Overhead Story Channel. Enjoy.
Lena got back from Seattle late Thursday night, just after 10 p.m. I'd left the porch light on for her. It was one of those small rituals we'd held onto, something comforting from the early days. She stepped inside the apartment like she had just returned from a spa weekend, not a 4-day work conference. Her cheeks were flushed, her smile wide. She was laughing into her phone when she walked in, one hand dragging her carry-on suitcase behind her, the other twirling a strand of her hair. "Yeah, no, seriously, you're the worst," she said, laughing harder, pausing briefly to glance in my direction as if I were a houseplant before turning back toward the conversation. "Text me when you get home, okay?" Another laugh. "All right, good night." She ended the call and finally gave me her full attention. That's when she saw it, what I was holding. Her smile faltered. Just a blink, but enough to notice if you were watching closely. And I was. The note was simple, written on a folded piece of plain white paper that had tumbled out of her suitcase's side pocket when she rolled it into the living room. I almost didn't notice it, but something about the way it had fluttered to the ground like it didn't belong made me pause. I picked it up, unfolded it, and read the words once. Then twice. "Thank you for that night. See you in 2 weeks." No signature. No context. Just 10 words written in Lena's unmistakable handwriting, the loopy LS and clean strokes I'd watched her scribble across birthday cards and sticky notes for years. She stepped forward quickly, snatching the paper from my hand with a sharpness that didn't match her previously bubbly mood. "Oh, that," she said, forcing a laugh that came out too high-pitched, too quick. "That's from a presentation. Just a dumb mock-up we did at the conference for a design pitch. Role-playing stuff. You know how that goes." I didn't say anything. I just watched her. She held the paper like it was radioactive, then walked toward the kitchen, opened a drawer, and shoved it in. Her movements were stiff, deliberate. She didn't look at me again. Just muttered something about needing a shower and disappeared down the hallway. The bathroom door clicked shut a few seconds later, followed by the distant hum of running water. I stood there for a long time, staring at the drawer she'd just stuffed the note into. Every cell in my body told me to go pull it out, reread it, look for something, anything to make it make sense. But I didn't. I just stood there frozen. When she came out of the bathroom 20 minutes later, hair damp and pulled into a loose ponytail, she acted like nothing had happened. She was wearing one of my old t-shirts, the one from our first trip to Colorado. It was a small detail, but I couldn't ignore it. It felt calculated, like a move made by someone trying to reset the energy in the room. She gave me a half smile. "I'm exhausted," she said. "That conference was nonstop." She stretched her arms above her head in a slow, exaggerated way. "I'll tell you all about it tomorrow." I nodded, but I didn't say anything. We both knew I wasn't going to ask. We went to bed in silence, backs turned, a few inches of mattress between us that felt like miles. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the shadows made by the street lamp outside. She fell asleep quickly, too quickly for someone who claimed to be exhausted from travel and nonstop events. Her breathing slowed and deepened within minutes. I lay there, still wide awake, hearing every tick of the old clock in the hallway. The apartment was quiet, but my thoughts weren't. I kept hearing her laugh from earlier, the tone of her voice, the easy charm. It wasn't how she talked to her coworkers. It wasn't even how she talked to me anymore. And that note, those 10 words, they weren't written for a mock-up or a project brief. I wasn't a fool. I knew her writing. I knew her tone. I knew when something was real and when it wasn't. That wasn't a fake note. That was something private. Something personal. Something an asterisk, mate. The worst part was how fast she tried to erase it. Like the moment it landed in my hand, it became a threat to her entire performance. But if it was just a prop, why hide it? Why change the subject so fast? Why not show me the rest of the presentation or laugh with me about it? Why did she shove it in a drawer like a secret? Because it was one. And for the first time since Lena started changing in ways I couldn't explain. New perfume, new passwords, longer meetings, less eye contact. I couldn't convince myself it was all in my head. Lena was always good at controlling the narrative. Whenever I asked too many questions, she had a smooth answer. Too smooth sometimes. I chalked it up to stress, to work, to us just getting older. We'd been together almost 7 years. I told myself people evolve, and not every change is a red flag. But something in me shifted that night. Something that had been quietly unraveling for months finally snapped. I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready yet, but I started watching her differently, listening closer, noticing things I had trained myself to ignore. At around 3 a.m., I slipped out of bed and stood in the kitchen, staring at the drawer. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I'd already read what I needed to read. Instead, I leaned against the counter and tried to breathe. Tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with the sick feeling in my gut. The one that told me I was no longer the only one in Lena's orbit. It wasn't just the note. It was the way she lit up walking through the door. It was the voice she used on the phone. The soft one I hadn't heard directed at me in months. It was the way she froze the second she saw the paper in my hands. That moment, the one where her face changed, burned itself into my memory. A flicker of panic. A flash of recognition. Like a magician realizing the trick had gone wrong mid-performance. That look, you can't fake that. And I don't think she meant for me to see it. By the time I finally crawled back into bed, Lena had shifted onto her side, facing the window. Her hand was curled under her chin. Her hair spread across the pillow like a postcard. She looked peaceful, serene, but all I saw was the space between us. Cold, empty, unfamiliar, and for the first time in our relationship, I didn't reach across the sheets. I just lay there, eyes open, listening to the sound of someone I thought I knew breathing beside me, and wondering how long she'd been this far away. The next morning, I woke up before Lena. Or maybe I hadn't really slept at all. It was hard to tell. My mind had been running laps all night, circling that note like a dog around a fence it can't jump over. 10 words, 1 line, and suddenly, everything else looked different. She was still asleep when I got out of bed, lying there like nothing had shifted. But I couldn't stop watching her. There was something about her face in sleep that used to make me feel calm. Not anymore. I looked at her and felt like I didn't know who I was looking at. I went into the kitchen, poured myself some coffee, and stood by the window, watching the morning creep in. It was cloudy, overcast. The kind of morning where you want to crawl back into bed and pretend the world doesn't exist. But I couldn't do that. Not with everything in my head pulling at me from all sides. That note had flipped a switch. It made me look back, made me reevaluate. In January, Lena changed her phone password. She didn't make a big deal of it, just did it one night while we were watching a show. I only noticed because I saw her enter a new code. When I asked her about it, she said it was something her firm required for security. Too many client leaks lately, she had said, brushing it off. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that tiny moment felt suspicious. That's when she stopped leaving her phone out. She used to leave it on the kitchen table, the nightstand, the couch. Now it was always either in her hand or face down, out of reach. Around that same time, she started wearing a new perfume. I remember the first day she put it on. We were heading out to dinner, and the scent hit me as she walked past. It was floral, lighter than what she usually wore, but sharp. She told me before that she hated floral scents, said they gave her headaches. So I asked her why the change, and she said it was a free sample she got and decided to try. Then she kept wearing it, week after week. That bottle sat front and center on the bathroom shelf, replacing the sandalwood she used to like. The one I used to compliment. I didn't say anything. I figured people's tastes change. But now, I couldn't help but wonder. Was it really her taste that changed? Or was it someone else's? Then there were the late nights. It started small, maybe once or twice a week. She'd text to say she was staying late at the office. Nothing strange about that. Lena's an architect. Big clients, tight deadlines. I used to bring her takeout when she worked late. But over time, those nights became more frequent and she stopped inviting me to visit. One time I offered to bring her dinner and she replied, "That's sweet, but I'm in a flow. Don't want to break concentration." Flow. That word stuck in my head. It wasn't just work either. One weekend in March, she told me she was staying with her friend Darcy because they were doing a wine and design thing, something about sketching concepts for a nonprofit project. She left Friday night and didn't come home until Sunday afternoon. I remember standing in the kitchen Sunday morning, her side of the bed cold, texting her to see when she'd be back. She didn't respond for 2 hours. When she finally did, the reply was casual. "Still at Darcy's. Be home later. Love you." With a heart emoji. Something about it didn't sit right. I had never doubted her before. But that weekend, for the first time, I felt something tugging at the edges of my trust. Then there was the night I overheard her on the balcony. I hadn't meant to listen in. I was just grabbing water from the kitchen. She didn't know I was home yet. I'd gotten off work early. I heard her voice through the sliding door, low and soft, like she was trying not to be overheard. The kind of voice people use when they're sharing secrets. I didn't hear much. Just a few sentences, vague and out of context. But the one that stuck was, "Yeah, I miss you too. I'll figure something out." Then silence. And when I opened the door, she turned around so fast it startled me. "Didn't hear you come in," she said, trying to sound casual. But her voice was tight. I asked who she was talking to, and she said her sister, something about helping her plan a surprise for their mom's birthday. I believed her. At least, I wanted to. But now? I'm not so sure. Looking back, it all forms a pattern. A quiet, deliberate shift. She started guarding her privacy like it was a second job. Her phone, her time, her stories. Everything got just a little bit foggier. She was still Lena on the surface, still asked about my day, still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, but something underneath had cracked. And I had pretended not to see it. That's what hurts the most. I wasn't blind. I just didn't want to look too closely. I told myself not to be paranoid, not to become the kind of man who snooped or suspected. I believed trust was the foundation of everything. But trust is a two-way street. And now I was starting to feel like I'd been walking it alone for a while. By the time Lena wandered into the kitchen that morning, rubbing her eyes and yawning, I'd already played the last 6 months over in my head a dozen times. She smiled sleepily, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Coffee? Please tell me there's some left." "Yeah," I said, handing her the mug I had just poured for myself. "Here." She blinked at me. "You sure?" I nodded. Not really in the mood for it. She shrugged, took a sip, and leaned against the counter. Bless you." She was back to normal, like nothing had happened. Like that note never existed. Like she hadn't shoved it in a drawer without explanation and walked away from it like it was nothing. I watched her closely. The way she sipped her coffee, the way she avoided eye contact just slightly. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't notice. But I did. That tiny hesitation, that flicker of discomfort. It was there. I wanted to ask her again. About the note. About Seattle. About who she'd been on the phone with when she walked in. But I didn't. I wanted to catch her in a lie, but I also didn't want to hear it. Not yet. Because once the truth came out, there'd be no going back. And part of me still hoped, desperately, stupidly, that maybe I was wrong. That hope was shrinking, though. Every memory I replayed only made the truth feel more obvious. Her new distance wasn't random. It was built brick by brick. And I had watched her lay everyone, telling myself it was nothing. I finished my own coffee in silence while Lena flipped through her phone. She laughed at something, a text, maybe, or a meme, but she didn't show it to me like she used to. She just kept scrolling. I was glued to a world I wasn't part of anymore. And right then, I knew something for certain. Whatever had started in Seattle, or maybe long before that, wasn't going to stop on its own. And if I wanted answers, I was going to have to stop waiting for her to give them to me. By the third day after Lena's return from Seattle, I'd stopped trying to suppress the noise in my head. It was constant now. Every time she looked at her phone and tilted it away. Every time she said she was popping out for groceries, but came back with only a half-empty shopping bag and a dazed smile. Every small inconsistency lit up in my mind like an alarm. I wasn't looking for red flags anymore. They were practically setting themselves on fire. I didn't want to snoop. I told myself that again and again. But the truth was, I had already started. I hadn't confronted her. Not yet. But my mind was already digging through the past, connecting dots I hadn't wanted to acknowledge before. I was living in a house that no longer felt like mine, sleeping next to a person I couldn't fully trust, and somehow still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd wake up from all this with an apology and a confession that wasn't devastating. But that hope was dying fast. On Saturday morning, Lena said she needed to run some errands. Her words, not mine. That was her new placeholder phrase. It could mean anything. Groceries, a mani-pedi, coffee with a friend, or maybe something far less innocent. "Want me to come with you?" I asked casually, like I wasn't measuring her every reaction. She paused for half a second, just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. "I'll be quick," she said, grabbing her keys. "Nothing exciting. You'd be bored." She kissed me on the cheek, and I didn't even flinch. I just watched the door close behind her, then turned to the living room, where her old iPad was still charging near the couch. She never used it anymore, not since she got her work-issued tablet. But last year, she synced everything across devices to make file transfers easier. Photos, notes, emails, everything tied to her cloud account. My hands shook as I picked it up. I knew the passcode. I still remembered the date she chose. The day we adopted our old dog, Cooper. He died 2 years ago, and sometimes I still expected to hear his paws on the floor in the middle of the night. The tablet unlocked on the first try. There was a folder on the Photos app labeled Seattle _ on F22. Innocent enough. I opened it. The first few pictures were what you'd expect from a work trip. Grainy snaps *TS of architecture slides. Group dinners, name tags on lanyards. But then the tone of the folder changed. Somewhere near the middle, nestled between 2sh*TS of a downtown skyline, I found it. An image that punched the air right out of my lungs. It was Lena, in a hotel bar, seated next to a man I didn't recognize. He had his arms stretched behind her on the booth, not quite touching but close enough to feel familiar. They were smiling. Not the kind of smile you give a coworker. It was the kind that lingered after the flash, the kind that came with an inside joke, shared history, maybe even anticipation. I swiped to the next photo. They were at a pool. She wore a sundress I'd never seen before, her hair pulled up, her body angled toward him. He was shirtless, drink in hand, leaning in. They weren't kissing, but the space between them was minimal, too minimal for colleagues, too comfortable for strangers. The third photo hit hardest. It was Lena, standing by the window of what I assumed was her hotel room, wearing black lingerie, her hand resting on her hip, her head tilted slightly, lips parted in the smallest, almost bashful smile. I recognized the lingerie immediately. I'd seen it once, about a year ago, stuffed in the back of her drawer. When I asked about it, she claimed it was a gift she never liked enough to wear. That was the end of the conversation. The photo was titled, "For Colton." That name, Colton, meant nothing to me. I didn't know anyone by that name. He wasn't a coworker she'd mentioned. Not someone I'd seen on her social media. He was a ghost up until now, and suddenly he was everywhere. I felt sick. I wanted to throw the tablet across the room, punch a wall, scream. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I sat back on the couch, placed the iPad gently on the table, and stared at it like it might turn into something else if I gave it long enough. Colton. The name echoed like an infection in my brain. I went back into the folder. More photos. More of them at dinner, walking through a lobby, his hand low on her back. Nothing overtly explicit. No smoking *N in the legal sense. But in every image, they looked like what they were, lovers. People who shared something secret, something thrilling. Something designed to stay hidden. There was no scenario in which these photos had an innocent explanation. Not this many. Not that pose. Not that smile. And not the message on that photo file. For Colton, that was the nail in the coffin. She didn't send that for a presentation. She didn't pose like that for a pitch deck. She had crafted an alternate life, one where I didn't exist. Where someone named Colton filled the space I used to occupy. The betrayal was no longer theoretical. It was captured in high resolution. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I spent the rest of the afternoon digging. I checked the rest of the synced albums, her notes app, anything connected to the cloud. I found deleted messages, fragments, timestamps, contact info with no matching phone number. A few calendar events were labeled vaguely, client dinner, check-in, 8 p.m. Always just enough to fly under the radar, never enough to explain. That night, she came home like everything was normal. She set down a small grocery bag, pulled out a bottle of wine, and smiled. Figured we could open this later, she said. It's been a long week. I nodded. Yeah, it has. She didn't ask me about my day. Didn't ask what I'd been doing. Maybe she thought I didn't care enough to look. Or maybe she was too confident in her ability to lie. Either way, I watched her open the bottle, pour 2 glasses, and hand one to me like we were still something whole. We sat on the couch and watched half a movie before she fell asleep on my shoulder. Her head rested there like it had 1,000 times before. But this time I felt nothing. No comfort. No warmth. Just silence. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed up scrolling through those photos again. Memorizing them. Letting them hurt. I needed to feel it all. No more excuses. No more giving her the benefit of the doubt. I saved the images to a private drive. Labeled them plainly. Seattle. Colton. Proof. Then I backed them up again. And again. Because this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of whatever came next. For the first 2 days after I found the photos, I didn't speak a word to Lena about it. Not even a sideways comment. She went about her routines, humming while she folded laundry, tapping away on her laptop, kissing me goodbye in the mornings like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't ripped our marriage apart behind my back and sealed it with a private smile in black lingerie. And I let her. I responded when she talked, laughed when it was expected, touched her arm when she reached for mine. I became the version of myself she remembered, calm, reliable, present, because I needed her to believe nothing had changed. But everything had. Something shifted in me the second I saw her posing for Colton. My heart had once cracked under the weight of suspicion. Now it had hardened under the truth. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was calculating. I wasn't going to blow up. I wasn't going to yell or break things or give her the satisfaction of tears. If she wanted a secret life, then fine. I'd build my own version of quiet retribution. And I'd do it thoroughly. It started with the email archives. Lena wasn't especially tech-savvy. Her old Gmail account was still logged into the iPad, and though she rarely used it anymore, it had a full history going back years. I started combing through the search bar: Colton, Seattle, hotel, confirmation, receipt. Most of it was noise. But then I found it. A forwarded hotel reservation from 2 weeks prior. The sender? A generic concierge address from a luxury resort just outside the Seattle city center. The message read, "Hi Lena. Your reservation for 2 has been confirmed. Suite 714 will be available for early check-in Thursday at 2 p.m. We've arranged for a chilled bottle of champagne per your request. Let us know if there's anything else we can assist with. Amber, guest relations. Suite? For 2. Champagne. And this was supposed to be a conference. I ****, saved it to a hidden drive. I opened a new folder titled simply, Documents, Legal. Not because I had plans that minute, but because it felt like drawing a line in the sand. Over the next few days, I expanded the collection. I synced her calendar to mine using a third-party plugin. I cross-referenced her travel bookings with the fake work events she told me about. Every so-called client dinner matched up with nights she came home hours late. Hair tousled, excuses stale. I started with photos, then receipts, then email confirmations, then location tags buried in metadata from her phone camera that uploaded to the cloud. Every time she thought she was being careful, she left a fingerprint. And I followed it. And still, I said nothing. She came home each night like a character in a badly written play, offering plastic smiles and distracted affection. She'd scroll through her phone, occasionally laugh at a text, tilt the screen away from me like it was muscle memory. Sometimes I'd ask, "Who's that?" "Oh," she'd say, "just Darcy. She's going through it right now. It's been nonstop." Darcy, her eternal alibi. I texted Darcy one afternoon. Nothing aggressive, just casual. "Hey, Lena said you guys went out last weekend? Hope you two had fun." She replied 10 minutes later. "Hey, wish we had. I haven't seen Lena in weeks. Hope everything's okay." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I ****ed it. At night, while Lena slept in our bed, I sat on the couch uploading files to a secure cloud I paid for under a new alias. The plan wasn't to keep the evidence forever, just long enough to use it when the time came. And that time was coming. By Thursday, I wanted more than just ****TS and metadata. I wanted indisputable visual confirmation. Something that didn't just expose the affair but showed its full dimension. The lies, the ***Macy, the coordination. So I called the hotel. I pretended to be Lena's assistant. I explained that I was helping reconcile expense reports and needed a receipt for Ms. Lena Rose's stay in Suite 714 during the week of the conference. I even threw in a fake assistant's email for them to forward it to, one I created just for this purpose. To my surprise, the receptionist didn't even hesitate. 10 minutes later, I received a detailed invoice. For nights, Suite 714. Room service twice a day. In-room breakfast for 2. 2 spa appointments. 1 under Lena's name. 1 under C. Whitman. I didn't even know his last name until then. Colton Whitman. There it was, printed in black and white. But I still wasn't done. I started wondering about the hotel's layout, what the restaurant looked like, whether there were security cameras. I knew most hotel security footage was restricted, but public areas, bars, lounges, dining spaces, often had their own systems. And depending on the staff, they might be a little too trusting. So I called again. This time, I played the role of a guest who lost something during a recent stay. I explained I had dinner at the restaurant with a woman on March 17th and that I'd left a leather notebook on the table. We were seated near the bar, I said. It was kind of a special night. I threw in a fake detail about a proposal. I just remember it meant a lot, I said. We had champagne. She was wearing black. I had a gray button-up. Do you know if anyone turned it in? Or if there's a way to check the cameras? The man I spoke with, Jason from guest services, paused. Well, we can't release video directly, he said. But if we locate footage with guests matching your description, we can review it in-house. If something turns up, we'll reach out. I thanked him and hung up. Did I expect them to call back? Not really, but they did. 3 days later, I got an email from Jason. He said they hadn't located my notebook, but they did confirm a couple dining in the time and location described, and attached a frame capture for verification. In the photo, there they were, Lena and Colton, seated together in the hotel's restaurant. She was leaning forward, one hand touching the stem of a wine glass, the other resting casually near his. They weren't kissing, but the body language said everything. And that wasn't all. The next message from Jason arrived an hour later. Another frame, this one showing Lena and Colton exiting the restaurant, walking toward the elevators, hands entwined. That was the moment I knew I had everything. I sent the footage to myself, then copied it to the legal folder. I labeled it, Dinner March 17th, confirmed. There was no more guesswork, no more hesitation. Lena wasn't just having an affair. She was building an entirely separate life. One full of reservations, routines, and rituals I'd never been invited into. I called a lawyer the next morning. Not to file yet, but to prepare. I asked about documentation. About how to collect it. What was admissible? What wasn't? How to protect myself quietly without alerting her to what I was doing. The lawyer, a quiet man named Carlton, listened patiently. After I explained everything, he asked just one question. Do you want to confront her directly? I paused. No, I said. I want to make sure when she realizes I know there's nothing she can deny. He nodded slowly. Then you're doing it right, he said. Stay quiet. Stay focused. Build everything before she even knows what's coming. That night, Lena climbed into bed and kissed my shoulder. Hey, she whispered. I've been thinking. We should do a weekend trip. Just us. I turned my head slowly. Yeah? Yeah, she smiled. Somewhere warm. Get out of the city for a bit. Sure, I said. Let's look at some places tomorrow. She smiled, content, then turned over and fell asleep. She had no idea the ground was shifting beneath her feet. And this time, I wasn't going to catch her when she slipped. It took me another full week to coordinate everything. Not because I wasn't ready, but because I wanted to be exact. Precise. I wanted the moment to hit with no warning, no room for escape, no time for her to reshape the truth into something easier to swallow. By now, the folder on my hard drive had grown bloated with evidence, *TS, metadata, travel receipts, surveillance stills, and a full timeline I'd pieced together from Lena's own digital footprint. I knew when she'd met Colton how long they'd been seeing each other, which fake excuses she'd used to cover for their weekends together, and even which wine they drank at that restaurant in Seattle. She always ordered Merlot with me, but with him it was a Pinot Noir. I noticed. I had built the case. Quietly. Coldly. And now it was time for the next phase exposure. But not the dramatic, public explosion I used to fantasize about when I was first putting this puzzle together. I didn't want screaming matches or scenes. I didn't want to throw a drink in her face or get some sad apology in front of people who didn't even matter to us. What I wanted was quiet confrontation. No denials. No chances to twist it. Just proof. Just truth. And someone else who needed to hear it. I'd been holding on to one card I hadn't played yet. Colton was married. I'd learned that during one of the long nights spent researching him, digging through company pages, wedding registries, old social posts. His wife's name was Lauren Whitman. She wasn't active online, but I eventually found a professional listing that included her work email. It was a gamble reaching out that way, but I knew how careful I needed to be. So I sent a message. Not a long one, just a subject line that read, "You deserve to know." And inside, a single paragraph. Hi Lauren. I don't mean to cause you harm. But I believe your husband, Colton Whitman, has been involved in a relationship with my wife, Lena Rowe. I have documentation, including photos and receipts. I'm not contacting you for revenge, I just think you should have the truth. If you're open to speaking, I'm here. Jason Hale. I hit send and waited. I didn't expect a response. Maybe she'd think it was spam. Maybe she already knew. But she replied within 3 hours. Jason. Thank you for reaching out. I've had suspicions for a while, but I've never had proof. If you're comfortable meeting in person, I'd like to see what you have. Lauren. We agreed to meet the following Thursday, late afternoon, in a small cafe near the Marina Neutral Ground. I wore a plain black button-up and brought a manila folder with 10 carefully selected items, 3 photos from Seattle, the hotel reservation, the champagne receipt, a dinner bill for 2, a calendar screenshot *T, a spa appointment, 1 email, and 1 frame from the restaurant security footage. Lauren showed up right on time. She looked tired but composed, like someone who hadn't cried yet but would soon. She introduced herself and sat across from me. We didn't waste time. I appreciate you doing this, she said, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea she didn't touch. I felt it for months. The late nights. The sudden weekend conferences. He even started running 5 times a week, which he's never done in his life. I gave her a small, sad smile. Lena suddenly loves Pinot Noir. Go figure. I handed her the folder. She opened it slowly and stared at the first photo. Her expression didn't crack, but her hand did tremble a little. She flipped through the pages, not saying anything for a long time. When she finally looked up, her voice was low. Controlled. He told me he was in Dallas that week. Company merger. I nodded. She said it was an architecture conference. Every detail's a lie. Lauren exhaled slowly. How long have you known? About 2 weeks, I said. But I had my suspicions long before that. I just didn't want to believe it. She nodded like she understood that more than she wished she did. So, she asked carefully, what now? And that's when I told her. I know where they'll be Saturday night. There's a client dinner on her calendar, same vague label she always uses. But I tracked the reservation. It's not for work. It's for the 2 of them. She leaned forward slightly. You found it. Restaurant on the east side. 7:15 p.m. Reservation under his name but with her phone number as the backup contact. Lauren was quiet for a moment, thinking. Do you want to be there? I asked. Because I do. Not to make a scene. Just to show them we know. Let them look us in the face and realize it's over. She met my eyes, and for the first time that day, her face shifted. Not anger. Not sadness. Resolve. I'll be there. We coordinated the details. Same time. Same restaurant. Different table, close enough to see them, not close enough to warn them too early. We agreed. No shouting, no drama, no yelling across the dining room. Just walk up. Put the folder on the table. Let them see it. And walk away. Saturday night came faster than I expected. I hadn't seen Lena all day. She spent most of it in our bedroom getting ready, texting someone, pretending it was a real client dinner. She wore a black dress I didn't recognize, new, probably bought just for nights like this. You look nice, I said as she stepped toward the door. She smiled at me, polite, detached. Thanks. Don't wait up. She was gone before I could respond. I drove separately, arrived early, and met Lauren outside. She wore a long coat and carried her own copy of the folder I'd given her. We didn't speak much. We just walked in and got seated at a table in the corner, positioned behind a wooden pillar with just enough clearance to watch the entrance. They arrived together. Colton had his hand on Lena's back as they walked in, easy, practiced. She was smiling in that way she hadn't smiled at me in months. They didn't notice us as they were led to their table. I watched them for a few minutes as they laughed and ordered drinks. Then Lauren looked at me. Now, she whispered. I nodded. We both stood and walked across the dining room slowly, steadily. No theatrics. Just footsteps. They noticed us halfway there. Lena's face shifted first, eyes narrowing, confusion curdling into recognition. Colton looked up and blinked, his lips parting slightly like he was trying to remember if he'd seen me in a dream. We reached the table. Neither of us said a word. I placed my folder in front of Lena. Lauren did the same to Colton. I looked at Lena for maybe 3 seconds. That was all I needed. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Then I turned and walked away. Lauren followed. No shouting. No slaps. No thrown glasses. Just evidence. Cold, organized, undeniable. We exited through the main doors and stepped into the night. The air felt sharp, clean. Lauren looked over at me and asked, Do you feel better? I shook my head.